Time wormhole, take me home to the place I belong. Star Trek Future, please just do it, man. Just fucking take me there. I really just need to not be here anymore in this fucking time. So I didn't grow up with Star Trek because I'm 26, not 56. But I did, as a kid, have a lot of, like, authority figures and state-appointed caretakers who had grown up with Star Trek. So I assimilated a lot of it through osmosis. Even without having seen the show back then, Picard's Enterprise, the aesthetic of it, it always seemed very comforting and homey to me. It felt like this beautiful, perfect, utopian future where all the problems that humanity had were just washed away and we could focus on just the great daring adventure of exploring the universe. Now that I'm almost through with watching Star Trek The Next Generation, I realize that my view of this legendary show was not entirely correct. Because what I found as an adult was much better than what I had envisioned as a child and, teenager. Star Trek Future is not in fact a society devoid of flaws and problems. Star Trek Future is a society aware of its flaws and seeking to solve its problems. See, I'm not even on about, like, the technology, right? Sure, the holodeck is cool, the transporter, very convenient, the replicator, that's the height of luxury, but I also really enjoy theater of the mind and the, shuttles that go into, space shuttles that go into atmosphere and the, rattling I've never done it, of course, I'm not a fucking astronaut, but I imagine I like planes too, it's cool. And I also like to cook, so the replicator would be convenient, but, I wouldn't be using it all the time. Just the biggest appeal of the society there to me is, aside from the fact that, none of them apparently can talk like normal human beings, it's all like this stilted bullshit. The thing that really appeals to me, and always had very much appealed to me, is that I was able to identify a bit more with, their cultural attitudes that they have in Star Trek Future. Also, the weird-ass onesies. You can take those the fuck away, that shit looks weird. But right, one of the things, for instance, in Star Trek Future Society that I have always been a lot more comfortable with than with the current world I am forced to inhabit, is that they well and truly are a society that does not see color. And I don't mean this in a liberal way where it's like, let's just ignore all the systemic problems that minorities face and pretend that everything's fine. I mean this in these problems have been resolved for minorities. They're no longer facing systemic hurdles to, living like everyone else. Skin color is just an aesthetic thing in Star Trek, and the being of a certain culture is just, certain things are more known to you than others, so you're more comfortable with them. Not to mention that all human culture, everything that humans have produced, all the cultural practices and mythoses and stories and religions and musics and what have you, from all over the world, now just all human culture that all humans share. The beautiful diversity that humanity has in the things that we've come up with is now everyone's. Mozart and Debussy are no longer seen as separate or even, God forbid, superior to didgeridoo or Tuvan throat singing. Now, of course, let's be fair, from a practical perspective, the high culture that the characters enjoy to signify that they enjoy high culture is in the show, mostly Mozart and Debussy, more like Debussy. Especially from a 2021 perspective, but you really need to understand these things in the spirit of how they were meant instead of through the lens of the various kinks and scars that the show has acquired through decades of cultural attitudes changing in our modern world. Especially compared to 90% of the stuff that was airing back when TNG first came out. It's held up pretty well. And I've always been able to identify with those Star Trek Future attitudes a lot more. because that's just always how I viewed people. I've never really understood why people need to rank everything, like this need for hierarchy. Going, oh, this kind of people or this kind of culture is better than another. Like, just because two things are different from each other doesn't mean that one of them has to be better. They can just be not the same thing. And if you like one of these things better, that doesn't mean it's somehow objectively better than the other. It's okay that you like one of them more, but you just like it more. That's the only difference between them. Which of course isn't to say that, a lot of cultural attitudes that are still prevalent across the world aren't bad and horrific, but you can point that out with simple ethical arguments. Usually the very simple ethical argument of human suffering poo-poo. You don't need to, replace the inferior culture with a superior culture. But really, probably the main thing to me that I might not have been able to appreciate had I seen Star Trek as a teenager, I feel like this is a very adult thing, is the attitude that Star Trek Future has to human imperfection. People in Star Trek Future just accept that humanity is flawed, and not just on an individual level, but a bigger societal level. So there's this concept of emergent intelligence. You might have heard of it before. It's basically when you have a lot of individual units, and these different units are interconnected, and they all make small decisions, and the sum of those decisions amounts to something that appears to be an intelligence that acts with some level of what looks like intent. It's a principle that is broadly applied in modern AI research, and it's not really an untenable philosophical position to say that humans, we ourselves, are emergent intelligences. Our brains are just big clusters of interlinked circuits and lobes that process information and make decisions based on the individual pieces of information that they acquire, and the sum of all of that computing is us. And whenever you have a group of people acting together, forming a system, that system might be considered a form of emergent intelligence. Corporations are people in the sense that they do appear to possess some sort of intelligence because they have goals which they approach strategically and with intent. They have a public face, they used to interact with other people, they keep track of the trustworthiness of various different institutions. Instead of being like a brain made up of a bunch of lobes that make an emergent intelligence that altogether make these decisions, it's a bunch of brains that act as the lobes of this greater emergent intelligence of the corporation. They can't communicate as effectively as brain cells at different parts of our brain, the different lobes and shit, but fundamentally, it's the same thing that is happening. Now, the big problem is, of course, that, especially with the example of corporations as emergent intelligences, is that the emergent intelligences that they form are sociopaths. And of course, any emergent intelligence is flowing and ever-changing to a certain extent. If you change the components of the system that make up the emergent intelligence, the way that it operates will change, though rarely will it depart too far from its core values. Like any intelligence, an emergent intelligence is to a certain degree self-correcting. AKA, if somehow a CEO with a moral compass of some sort gains control of a corporation, the board of directors will yeet that motherfucker very quickly the second he starts interfering with the bottom line. At that point, a temporary attitude has been corrected by the general disposition of the emergent intelligence. Just like in every single one of us, there are competing ideas, goals, desires in conflict with one another over what course of action should ultimately be taken. And all these emergent intelligences are stacked and interlinked, interconnected, overlapping. You don't know where one ends, the other begins. They are all part of greater emergent intelligences. And especially in our super connected global digital age, you can talk about an emergent intelligence of humanity. It is in many ways the biggest and most complex emergent intelligence of all, and let's be honest, it's not necessarily great, morally speaking. It's fucked up, egotistical, self-destructive in a way that it just destroys everything else with it. And then, of course, certain aspects of the emergent human intelligence have realized that, oh shit, boy, maybe I should sober up. I've been sniffing coal for too long. Who knows when that will, like, take effect? Because a lot of people have thoughts about, oh, maybe what I'm doing here is a little bit fucked up. But these are thoughts that you push aside because it's not nice having to confront them. Now, the big difference in Star Trek Future is that all of these emergent intelligences, and specifically the emergent intelligence of humanity as a result, seem to have gone to therapy. If you think about the psychological journey that any given person takes throughout their life, you know, there's ups, there's downs, there's sidewayses sometimes. There's no guarantee that things will turn out good in the end, but there is ideally a constant evolution in the learning of the self. It's an ongoing process that the older you get, the better you understand who you are. And you can, if you're good about it, impart this on others to help them discover who they are better. And something that will happen rather often in this kind of process is that people will realize, oh damn, I'm kind of a piece of shit. Maybe I should change something about that. I mean, think about this, right? Most boomers never went to therapy. Now they're old and just brimming with psychological issues that they lash out at other people with. I honestly, just even in terms of the percentage, I know a lot of millennials and zoomers who are more mature than like the same percentage of boomers, because they went to therapy. And just to be clear, I don't necessarily mean by this like seeing a shrink specifically, although that is of course an excellent form of therapy. It's not accessible to everyone all the time, and you can have bad luck when seeing a therapist. The important bit is to like go through the learning experience of getting to know and understand yourself and acquiring the tools with which to regulate yourself into being the kind of person that you would like to be. That's fundamentally what pretty much all therapy is about, giving you the tools to understand and manage your own mind. And if we extrapolate this to the level of the emergent intelligence, that is exactly what happened in Star Trek Future. Humans are more rational, tolerant, and culturally evolved, if you will, because we learn to understand ourselves as individuals and as a species psychologically in the various emergent intelligences that emerge from the individual people. We understand that we are flawed and that we're not perfect, but we understand what the flaws are and what strategies we might engage in to actually overcome them. So when we try our best, we can actually try our best. And this attitude is deeply reflected in the way that people in Star Trek think. They see themselves and each other as imperfect, flawed people who sometimes make mistakes and need to take care of their body as much as their mind. They have medical officers, but they also have therapists on board of those starships, and pretty much everyone goes there. That's a big, contentious issue that's talked about in culture today. Imagine how revolutionary it was back when TNG first aired. And, you know, perhaps to a certain extent, because Star Trek is a thing that exists in the culture of humanity, I'm seeing this process of the emergent intelligence of humans going to therapy happening a little bit, much like I've seen it happen in the past. For a few centuries now, humanity has been in the process of becoming a lot more kind, tolerant, and empathetic to, like, reach a sort of standard of what it might one day aspire to be. Some areas, certainly a lot more than others, and, you know, like any process of psychological, like, you know, healing or growing, it's full of pitfalls and hypocrisy and falling back onto old coping behaviors in secret. We have phases where we turn back to being our old selves and do all the fucked up shit we used to do. We just pretend like that's not the case. It takes a long ass time for humans to mature and grow. The timescale of the emergent intelligence of humanity is even larger still. But it's happening. And it's continuing to happen in ways that 100 years ago nobody would even have thought possible. And Star Trek is essentially showing us a potential scenario of what we might achieve if we as humanity go to therapy. There's no guarantee we'll make it, but in a show full of like impossible shit like FTL travel and transporters and what have you. This might seem the least plausible, but it is actually the most achievable. We as a species need to take a step back, reflect upon who we are and who we want to go. And we've already kind of been doing that for a while. It's just, you know, maybe, hopefully, now that we have better means to do so, we might actually end up doing so. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your other communities. My camera's running out of battery. You know, buy Patreon, merchandise, donate, things. And in that spirit, watch Star Trek. It's cool. See you around, cunts.